You can come sit at our end. Come sit with you. Please come sit down here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Wally Bobkowitz. I'm the city manager of the city of Evanston. Thank you for coming this evening to what is a very early community budget workshop in the process of working on the fiscal year 2012 budget for the year beginning on January 1st, 2012. As many of you know, the city is in the midst of a 10-month fiscal year, which will be a transitional fiscal year that will take us January 1st to a new 12-month cycle. So we'll be moving from a March 1, February 28 agenda budget to a January 1, December 31. So we're here this evening as part of a week-long initiative called Engage Evanston, where we have asked residents throughout the community to give us their budget ideas on how we should tackle some of the challenges we're facing for fiscal year 2012. We have had senior city staff out in the community handing out flyers, asking community members to participate either online at cityofelvanston.org, by calling us at 311, by sending information to us at info@cityofelvanston.org, sending information the old-fashioned way via mail, and I've gotten a couple of handwritten letters from residents over the last couple of days with some ideas. Or they can participate in an online survey, which we have had up since May 1st. So the purpose of this evening's meeting is to kind of give an overview of where we see the city budget looking kind of in a broad context, and then to talk specifically about the process that staff has proposed to the City Council to review budget options for the fiscal year beginning January 1, 2012. Those of you who follow this, and many of you in the room are regular followers of our budget activities, know that this is the third budget process since I've been city manager, when I came on in the summer of 2009, and we've had a community process each year. We did a lot of cutting the first year, did a little bit of cutting this past year, and I think are looking at cuts somewhere in the middle as we move forward in 2012. And one of the things that we heard from the community with our process last year, which was sort of an abbreviated version of the work that we did for the prior fiscal year, was that there was not as much substance to it as people would like. And what we hope, and we'll explain during the course of this evening, is a plan that we think will provide a little bit more substance to the entire budget process. And when we come back to the community in August and September, we will have additional information available for residents to be able to sink their teeth into and provide additional feedback prior to submitting a proposed budget to the City Council in mid-October. So with that, Brandon, if you could start up the machine, and we'll turn off the lights, and I'll walk through a PowerPoint presentation that will describe some of the points I've just alluded to. At the conclusion of the presentation, we would like to get your input. We've done sort of the Phil Donahue approach the last couple times, and one of the challenges in this room is television, and so we're going to ask people to come to the podium and make their comments so that they can be heard and seen as we are televising this live, and we'll replay it on Channel 16. It will also be on the city's YouTube channel in coming days. So specifically this evening we'll talk about projections for revenue and expenditures in the city's general fund. We'll talk about infrastructure and capital needs. We'll talk more specifically about the process we're proposing to go through over the next several months to evaluate new ideas for the budget, as well as to evaluate each of the city's services, and then end the evening with your questions and thoughts. As we've looked at assumptions for the fiscal year 2012 budget, we have assumed in our projections a 2% growth on revenues. And this slide details some of those revenues that we see, as well as some of the projections from others that we completed at the end of last year. I think these numbers are moving targets, but at this point we feel confident a couple of months into the fiscal year at this early stage that 2% growth on revenue sources makes sense. This chart gives you a little bit of a background as to what we've seen with property taxes. We've seen a fairly steep decline from 07 to 08. a little bit of an uptick in '09 and then a decline again in '10. We're projecting a return to some of those previous levels in the 2011 budget, and then a little bit of an increase in 2012. On the sales tax, again, I think we've seen a pretty a significant decline over years. You'll notice that the 2011 budget is a little bit bigger of a drop, and again, you'll see that in many of both the revenue and expenditure projections. And I would remind the audience that part of that reason is because the 2011 budget is a 10-month budget. So where you're comparing with 12-month budgets, it's a 10-month budget. No, I'm fine. We also receive a portion of the state income tax. This is especially timely right now in that Governor Quinn has a proposal that he is floating with members of the Illinois General Assembly that would significantly decrease our share of the state income tax. One proposal that is being discussed is that the city and village share of state income tax would be withheld for the remainder of calendar 2011. As part of the state's budget balancing. Another proposal that has been floated has been a permanent reduction in the income tax, and that number has been a 30% reduction in what cities receive for income tax. So you can see for 2011, 4.6, 2012, 5.5. So in a 12-month budget, we're looking at a little over $5 million annually. So if we were to see that money not come to us, or the lion's share of it not come to us in the current fiscal year because it was being held by the state to balance its budget, that would have a fairly significant impact. And then if we're looking at a 30% decrease, that would be between $1.7 and $2 million if that was a permanent shift. So while you see that this revenue source has declined in recent years, it certainly could be a more significant change pending some of the discussions in the Illinois General Assembly. The city's utility tax, we have a tax on various utilities here in the city, and again, a fairly significant drop in that over time. The real estate transfer tax, again, this is fees that are paid every time property changes hands here in the city of Evanston, a fairly significant drop between 07, 08, 08, 09. Some of that, I think, was a budgeting issue. I think the numbers that you see there are a little bit more accurate to actuals right now. Recreation program charges. These are fees that we charge for programs of our Parks, Recreation, Community Services Department. So in addition to taxes, the city collects a variety of fees for service, and you can see this number has generally increased over the last 5 years. When we look at expenditures, just to give you a sense of how we spend our money in different programs in the area of non-public safety, we have our legislative department, which includes the mayor and the city council, the city manager's office, which includes some program-specific areas such as our sustainability program, our intergovernmental relations program, our volunteer program, all of our outreach and community engagement activities. The city has an in-house legal department, so the lawyers who are city staff members who represent the city in various legal matters. Our Administrative Services Department, which was created about a year and a half ago, which combines our finance, human resource, information technology, and parking operations. Our Community and Economic Development Department, a department that received a name change to reinforce its focus on economic development, but included in this department is planning, zoning, housing, code enforcement, and building inspection, as well as economic development. We're one of a handful of communities in Illinois that has a health department, and that health department deals with community health programs as well as environmental health programs, does health inspections, restaurants, other purveyors of food. Our Public Works Department has the Streets and Sanitation Division, which is responsible for street maintenance, responsible for snow removal. Our fleet services, we by and large provide our own fleet, ownership of our fleet, as well as maintenance of our fleet. Our library department, a main library and a branch library in North Evanston. Our Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Department, which does a variety of programs, very traditional park programs, recreation programs, is responsible for operations at our lakefront responsible for multiple community centers around the community, a senior center, arts programs, as well as all youth programs. And one department missing here is our utilities department, which was spun off from our Public Works Department about a year and a half ago. And our utilities department includes our own water and sewer operations. Our last two operating departments in the category of public safety is our police department and our fire and life safety services department. Our fire department has 5 fire stations located around the community, and including a headquarters, which is co-located with the headquarters of our police department. And then another big piece of our expenditures are, in addition to these operational costs, capital projects and the money that we invest in buildings, facilities, streets, all throughout Evanston. So as we're looking at expenditure adjustments, we're looking at what we would look to for growth in expenditures in 2012. IMRF stands for the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. Our general government employees, that means any employee who is not in the police department or the fire department, their pension benefits are covered through a statewide pool known as the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. We are looking for a growth there of 0.25%. We provide health insurance coverage to all our employees. We're looking for a growth there of 0.75%. We are looking at general salary growth at 1%, and there are various components that make general salary growth. We have step increases that employees are due through successful evaluations at various points, so there's a portion of that 1% that is that. There are changes in of salaries through other adjustments that are made throughout the year. There's a portion there. And then there would be a portion potentially for a general salary increase. We have labor union contracts with about 80% of our employees, and many of them are due to expire on December 31st. So that is an unknown as to what that would be, but we're looking again to roll that all together as an estimated 1% growth factor. And then other growth in expenditures, some of our fixed costs, certainly fuel, as everyone in the community has experienced increased costs with fuel, so have we. While we buy our fuel in bulk and basically pump it ourselves, it is still a cost that continues to grow. And then personnel costs, again, really goes back as a portion of that general salary growth. So we're looking, as you look at all expenditures, a variety of different percentages that would help us model our expenditure growth. To give you a sense of how we spend our money in the general fund, and again, the general fund are those expenditures that are paid for by general tax dollars. So examples of the general fund expenditures are like our, God bless you, our police department, fire department, general government services. All of that really falls under the general fund. The biggest piece that's not part of the general fund would be our utilities department, water and sewer. That is a separate fund, but this gives you a sense. Our costs are very heavy on the salary side with people, benefits 19%, and then others. So really the things that you think of for traditional cuts in addition to people really is only an additional 23% of the general fund. This gives you a sense of staffing trends over time. While our population has remained fairly constant, you see our total staff numbers have gone down over time. This gives you a trend looking over the last few years. So certainly being faced with budget challenges is not new for the city of Evanston, and it is something that we've been looking at over the last couple of years. And I think as we see the trends continuing to move down, we wanted to take this opportunity this week and then as we move forward through the spring and summer to get input from the community because clearly the organization that we were in 2006, 2007 is not the organization we are today, and certainly will need to continue to change as time goes on. Our general fund expenditures, again, are very heavily placed on the safety side, so 39% of what we do is just police and fire. 61% really is the balance of our general fund operations. Our non-public safety expenditures, again, have decreased, rebounded a little bit. We project with 12, again, pointing out the 11 budget's 10 months. Public safety expenditures, again, have remain flat with the exception of that 10-month 2011 budget. So a general fund summary, revenues to expenditures, revenues in the green and the expenditures in blue. You hope for revenues to be at or greater than your expenditures, and as you can see, we've not done a great job of that, and are certainly looking as we move forward as having challenges in that area. Additional information on the general fund, which I think I pretty much have covered, but it really takes us down to sort of so what. So with all this information, where does this show us where we're going in the future? And our estimate for the fiscal year beginning January 1, 2012 is that we'll be facing a $1.4 million deficit, and for the fiscal year starting January 1, 2013, a $3.2 million deficit. Our capital needs, and we'll get back to our general fund in a little bit. Again, some of this has already gone through, but we have funds for a variety of other programs in the city. Our capital improvement program, for our general capital needs, buildings, streets, parks, it has been the city's past practice to issue general obligation bonds to fund those projects. Other funding sources you'll see here, the utilities. We have a fairly robust parking operation here in the city of Evanston, not only with meters but with parking structures. We receive a portion of the motor fuel tax, economic development fund, a portion of the transient occupancy tax. Here, the hotel tax goes toward economic development efforts. TIF stands for tax increment financing. We have several TIF districts located through the city. One has recently expired in the last year and a half, but others remain, and that remains a tool for us largely in the area of redevelopment. Grants, donations, and loans. One of the things we've done this fiscal year is create a development officer position to find additional sources of grants and donations to help us move forward with what we need to do. So with all that, a big piece of this story tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is not just our operating side. It's not just the deficit in the general fund for operations, but it's also a deficit of a different kind, and that is our ability to maintain the public infrastructure of the city of Evanston in a way that it needs to be done. And on the next several slides, show you things that many of you are already aware of, the deterioration of many of our streets throughout Evanston. We have significant issues with our rolling stock of fleet vehicles. We have everything from sedans to garbage trucks to fire hook and ladder trucks, everything in between. And some of those pieces of rolling stock are in need of improvement. Parking lots, the Church Street boat ramp, playground equipment, athletic surfaces, all things that need attention. This graph shows you a little bit about what our spending has been over the last several years with the capital budget, and it has ranged from a low with this budget of about $8.7 million to a high of about $12 million in 07-08, and if you were to go back even a few years earlier, higher numbers than that. So you see 2012, 2013 as being very big numbers. That 2012 number represents a backlog of capital projects, and that number is approximately $32 million. One of our challenges with capital projects and funding of capital projects is the issue of debt and how much debt the city should have in order to finance capital projects, and in many ways it's very appropriate to use debt to finance capital projects, but I think one of the challenges we face is what is an appropriate limit for debts. As you can see, again, from this graph, we have been issuing debt in the 10 to 12, actually 02, you'll see as high as $16 million. We issued no debt in 09, and about $6.5 million on tap, or $6.5 million was a number then from last year, which will be spent in 2011. It gives you a more sense of the capital needs, and I want to get specifically to this next slide, which talks about another piece of this budget puzzle, and that is I'm proposing to the City Council that we spend an additional $2 million a year in cash on capital projects rather than issuing more debt. We have over $100 million in capital debt, which we have no practical way to pay back the principal. And so while I think the reality is we're going to have to continue to issue smaller amounts of capital debt as we move forward, my recommendation to the council is that we have to turn the tide. And one way I propose to turn the tide is to take $2 million out of our operating budget and have it dedicated permanently to capital. In order to do that, that then takes the deficit numbers we're looking at and adds $2 million to them, $3.4 million number for 2012 and $5.2 million for 2013. Again, talking about the $111,233,880 is our current general obligation debt load. In my humble opinion, and my recommendation to the council is that that's a number that needs to come down. So that kind of paints a backdrop as to where we're at. This early in the process here as we sit on the 5th of May, 2011, looking toward adopting a budget for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2012, there's additional reductions that I believe need to be made in the city's budget. There's been lots of talk about taxes. The council has raised a portion of the property tax just for police and fire pensions, but we have not had an increase in 3 years of the property tax for general operating expenses. And certainly I've heard from many members of the council and many members of the community that the adding taxes is not the first step in a process in solving our budget problems. So what we decided we would do and recommended to the council, and they agreed, was to begin the process early and to spend this week, the week of May 1st through 7th, in an Engage Evanston process, which I talked about a little bit earlier. So really one of the hopes of this evening is to get some feedback from you on your ideas in addition to all the other outreach we're doing. We would also like to explain what the process would be like as we move forward over the next several months and get your feedback on that. We're also going to talk a little bit about a community services comparison that we're doing to provide additional information to the mayor, the city council, and the community on what like communities are doing around the country, and then to share with you the calendar as we see it moving forward between now and the end of November. So the Engage Evanston, for those who may have missed the top of the meeting, we're encouraging folks to go to our website, cityofevanston.org. You'll find a link to our Engage Evanston website, and what that does is it allows residents to submit ideas online. About 150 ideas that have been submitted since May the 1st. We also have the documents that were created during the last 2 budget processes, so there are ideas there, some of which have not been implemented, which we'll also keep in the mix. And again, looking to get written comments either through email or through regular mail, call 311. And we've also been reaching out at various community locations. We've been to grocery stores on Howard Street and at Dempster Dodge, North Branch Library, the main library, community centers, trying to get around the community to make people aware that we're soliciting their input. We'll then take back all of this input to the council in a week and a half on May the 16th to share the results of this meeting this evening, as well as the surveying that we have done, and to begin looking specifically at programs and services. We will then come back to the council in August with that information, have another series of community budget meetings during the month of September, and then have a proposed budget the first part of October. So as we look at how to evaluate services, because one component that we've recommended to the council would be to evaluate each and every service that the city of Evanston provides. And we're coming up with a list which we'll have to the council on the 16th. And Mrs. Earl, our Administrative Services Director, Joellen, what's the number at this point of the services as we're refining it citywide? 80? So we're going to be going to a council with a list which will be, right now it's about 60 or 70, and we'll refine that list as we move forward. And what we want to do with that list is do an evaluation of each of those services in a variety of areas. And one area that we've looked at is how does the particular service match with the city's strategic plan. The city of Evanston completed a strategic plan about 5 years ago, and there were multiple component parts to that strategic plan. And to remind you all of what those were, the first area was the area of economic viability. Second area was environmental sustainability. Third area was strengthening community. So those were the main areas of the strategic plan. And as we looked at the strategic plan, looking at a service-based process, and what we're proposing is this evaluation is not something we have come up with ourselves, but that some other communities around the United States over the last couple of years have been looking at. Those three areas in the strategic plan are probably not all-encompassing enough to measure all that we do in probably a way that would be meaningful to us. So another component of this is to look at the City Council's goals. And what we would do is then look at each service and measure that against the City Council's 13 goals, and those are listed here on the screen. So what we thought we would boil this all together, and we'll be proposing this to the City Council on the 16th, is that we would measure each service sort of with an amalgam of the City Council goals, the strategic plan main points, as well as just the general functional areas of the city, which we went to the city's comprehensive annual financial report and used the categories in the city's comprehensive financial report with the areas from the strategic plan and a general category for the City Council's goals, and came up with general management and support services, public safety, public works and utilities, health and human services, recreational and cultural opportunities, diverse housing options, economic viability, environmental sustainability, and then a general category for City Council goals. So what we will be doing is looking at each service, coming up with some key points, and I'll talk about those in a second, with each of those services, and do an evaluation of each of the service. So that evaluation would include the name of the service, a short description of the service, the number of staff providing the service, financial information regarding the service, both expenditure and revenue, mandates for the service. There are some things that we do in the city that are mandated by law, some that are mandated by practice, and others that are not mandated at all. Another interesting component is to make a determination is if there's been a change in the demand for the service. Communities change, and services provided by communities change. And so we can look and say that a particular service, there's been an increase in demand. I think that's an important measure to also look at, because if there has been an increase in demand, does that make that service more valuable to our residents? Alternative service providers, again, many things that we do are not provided in a practical way by others. Certainly public safety is the first that comes to mind on a wide scale, our utility operations, but other things that we do are provided by others, and so we would like to make that delineation. And then finally, opportunities for innovation. Innovation is an important piece of this, and as we try to look at what our challenges and opportunities are for the budget, we also don't want to look past the issues of innovation with each particular service. So this is a little bit difficult to see, but we wanted to kind of provide a practical example of what one of these service evaluations would look like. This deals with the service of animal control, which is done by the Evanston Police Department. A description that says the Animal Control Bureau handles requests and complaints from citizens dealing with domestic and wild animals, including birds and reptiles. It also counsels citizens on animal control problems and issues citations for violation of animal control ordinances. In addition, it apprehends and impounds stray animals and handles adoptions of unwanted dogs and cats in conjunction with CARE, which is a nonprofit. So each service would have a paragraph of description. The number of staff providing the service, in this instance 2.5 full-time equivalents, mandates for the service. This is an interesting one because we're saying at this point not applicable, but I think there would be people who would say that the Animal Control Bureau provides a service that would be a mandate. So that's something that's going to be a challenge through this process in making some judgment calls in some of these areas. The changes in the demand for service has remained relatively stable. Again, this is an example. I wouldn't want to stand behind that specific as it turns to animal control, but we would make that determination. Alternate service providers, there are private entities that do portions of the animal control provision we could look at. It's not widely available, but it would be an option. Opportunities for innovation, here partnering with neighboring communities to provide regional animal control services, and then the financial information. We spend for 11, looking at $185,648 expense on revenues of $6,248. So we would go through this exercise for each of those 60 or 70 services that we provide. We would then put that particular service against the scorecard matrix, grouped into two categories: basic program attributes, as I've discussed, as well as priorities. And if you were to put a number scale against animal control in this area, the numbers are cost recovery out of a scale 0 to 4 would be 1, reliance on the city to provide the service 1, priority results scoring, public safety 2, Health and Human Services 2, and part of the City Council's goals for a safe community 1. So that would be then a score, and then that total score would be added up, and we would then be able to rank each of the services that are provided by the score that would be developed. We've also talked with the council at the meeting on March 22nd about asking the community to go through an exercise of dividing up how the city should spend its money globally. And we're still working on how this would work, again, because the strategic plan was not created with something like this in mind. Only 3 areas, many of which do not cover all of the functional areas we provide. We would take the same list that we would use for the measures and go out to the community as part of the exercise in August and September to get a sense from the community how they think the $100, the mythical $100, would be spent among these various areas. I'll be honest with you, I still think this is a work in progress. I had promised that we would take this back to the council in April, which we will do, and we'll get some additional feedback at that time to see if it is a valuable exercise to go through. Another component of this is to look at like communities. I think as the council and the community have talked during previous budget discussions the last couple of years, there's always been interest as to what do others do that are like us in different kinds of ways. So staff has embarked upon an evaluation, and we hope to come up with a white paper that would be available again in August, talking about 10 different communities, 5 in Illinois and 5 in other parts of the country that have some similarities to us in some fashion or another, and to do sort of a laundry list of how they provide services. This is not meant to be in any way scientific, but is meant to provide some additional information and additional data for further consideration. The communities that we proposed to the council are Skokie, Arlington Heights, Oak Park, Champaign, and Schaumburg here in the state of Illinois, and then around the country, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Berkeley, California, Cambridge, Massachusetts, New Haven, Connecticut, and Rockville, Maryland. Each of them, those communities have either a university located in them or nearby, and have, to the best of our estimations, sensibilities somewhat similar to the residents of Evanston. So as we would move forward with the program groups, we would have a lot of information then ready in August for the council and the larger community to digest. We would have the program evaluations. We would have an evaluation of the ideas that we'll get from the community. And let me talk a little bit more about that. At the end of this week, after we've gone through this Engage Evanston process, we'll have a list of suggestions. And what I propose to do to the City Council on May 16th is provide them with a list, a subset list of those suggestions plus other suggestions that we would spend time coming up with very detailed information about changes of the way we do business, elimination of programs that we could consider as part of a budget solution. My guess is that list will be 35 or 40 ideas that we would then take and see how viable they are, put a dollar amount to, and then have that information available for the council and the community in August and September. So that would have all of that available as well. So where does that leave us? Then after this evening and this week of outreach, we'll be going back to the City Council on May 16th at a special meeting to share the results and to get additional input from the council. Then we're going to take this all back inside the Civic Center and do work. Because again, I think one of the greatest criticisms we heard last year from the budget process was that people were asked to comment on various proposals without having a whole lot of information about them. So our hope would be by August 8th to have the breakdown of all of the various city services we provide, have a breakdown of the various ideas that have been presented during this early part of the of the budget process and get feedback from the council, and then to reset what we think that deficit estimate is come August. Certainly, it's very early in the year. Lots of time and change in the community and the nation will occur between now and the first part of August, so we would have a better deficit estimate. Then through the month of September, we would have additional community budget meetings go back out in a similar way, which we have this week, using the internet, using telephones and mail and meetings out in the community to get feedback on what we've learned. That would all then be rolled into a proposed balanced budget that will be presented to the City Council in October. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that gives you a sense of what we're up to, and would really appreciate at this point in the evening to get your feedback on the process, to get your feedback on ideas and suggestions that you have for our budget for the fiscal year starting January 1, 2012. Any ideas that you propose this evening, we will get right up on our website so that members of the community can see them. There's also an opportunity with that website to do a little like, don't like, a thumb vote that you can do, so that will be part of that for people who are interested. And then if you have specific thoughts on the process, we want to make sure that the process is as meaningful as it can be. It's difficult in a community of this size, and the level of engagement that Evanston residents expect to do this properly. And I'm here to tell you that doing it properly is still a work in progress. And again, one of the reasons that we asked the council to allow us to have a community meeting tonight was to continue to get feedback from you to make sure that the process is as meaningful to all parties in the community as possible. So with that, again, we're going to ask, rather than walk around with the microphone, that you could come up to the podium here and have comments. We have members of staff who will take down every word, and we'll go from there. So just come on up and say who you are, and we're going to do it this way so that we got complaints that people weren't on television properly last time. So we'll have you stare right into the camera and use the microphone.
Hi, John Spesko, 1120 Noyes Street. First of all, I want to commend the city staff for coming up with more measures for us to evaluate. There's an old saying that you can't control what you don't measure, so I'm very happy to see some of these new measures. And in speaking of which, when I went through the 2010 budget last year, I noticed that you had revenues and expenses sort of categorized by the various programs that the Parks and Recreation have, being one of the larger departments of the city. So, for example, you might have expenses and revenues associated with programs at Chandler or Robert Crown or the aquatic summer camp and things that affect a lot of people in town. When I went through that, I noticed that there were very big differences in what I would call the profit ratio, the amount of revenues versus expenses for these different places. And I was just wondering if there was more accounting that could be done to sort of give us an idea of why there would be such big differences. I mean, there are, for example, Chandler seemed to run very close to break even, but other places like Robert Crown or a part of Robert Crown did not seem to run very close to break even. So I was just sort of curious if you could give us some insight into that as well.
And I'll be happy to answer any questions in addition to comments and suggestions that people have. I think the simple answer is that we haven't approached it quite as finely as that in the past, and I think one of the purposes of looking at the service assessment is to do that, and to look at, you know, what are apples to apples, what are apples to oranges, and to have a dialogue with the City Council to say, is there a policy that you'd like to have? For example, should all youth programs have a subsidy from the general fund of X? And if that's the case, then I think we look at all youth programs and say, where do they all fit? Should some have less subsidy, more subsidy based on a policy decision? The council may also choose to make a policy decision that says all adult programs should pay for themselves. And if that's the case, then look at each adult program and see if there's an adjustment that needs to be made there. So I think it's a matter of refinement in how we look at revenues and expenditures, and I think the process we're laying out, I'm pretty confident that that will capture the point you're most concerned about.
Janad Risky. First thing I'm going to say, the strategic plan and the council's goals have really very little to do with the operation of the city. Okay, that's number one. Number two, over the years here, looking at the budget, looking at things here, city is not tracking real cost. And if you want to show me a cost of a program, you have to gather all the costs up and not just put the cost for employees, but everything else that supports the program. You're not showing real cost. Also, number three, and over the years, the staff has presented phony numbers, maybe not financial numbers, but phony numbers to services and programs. So I'm already would have a concern that these staff will inflate numbers and put poor numbers in. All right, next item is FETs. I think the city needs to show those differently than FETs, because FETs are percentage of its employees. Need to show really if you're full-time employees, part-time employees, because pretend, adding a bunch of low-paying part-time employees and eliminating them in FETs doesn't really save money much. And the next thing, the city needs to fix its organizational charts. I had FOIA'd those, and some of those charts and those organizations are in poor condition. They don't explain what's going on here. And also not putting the utilities department up here. The utilities department is really part of the whole city budget. Money's taken from the utility department, put to the general fund. So that would be another comment. The utilities department needs to be looked at just as closely as every other department. Also, I've said this before, your capital program here is not run well, it is not organized, and you're not really monitoring or tracking it or holding employees accountable. And that needs fixed. Now, a few other things about, I made a list of items that add up to money here. Last year, $700,000 a yard waste sticker under sale. We spent $600,000 on 311. We hired a lobbying firm for $80,000 last year that we eliminated, and I don't see what we got for that. We hired a city employee to lobby, $100,000. That position should go away. We took another thing. We took $100,000 in an extra expense on a water contract. We have a volunteer position when everybody in these communities and all these organizations have volunteers. As an example, the animal shelter has probably hundreds of volunteers, and I don't know why we need a position in the city that's pretending it's getting volunteers. The city's management of the credit cards appears to be improving, but still seems to be high and spending a lot of money. We're probably still getting close to $1 million. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like that. There's an item that I've talked about before. Maple Avenue Garage is part of this whole economic development deal. City never fixed the space there. It's cost us at least $100,000 in rent a year because the city never developed the space and got it rentable. Another mistake of the city's. And I've said this before, of course, I don't believe council members should have medical benefits. That's $100,000. There's also spending too much money here on these studies. Studies after studies are done here. Studies are of little value to the taxpayers. It's either staff should stop these studies. We got a study to do a wind farm, a study to do Robert Crown, a study for this, a study for that. All these studies add up to a lot of money. And then I'll hear the statement from somebody, well, that's the money. The money there isn't the taxpayers' money. We got it from some program. Well, it's all our money. So, and finally, last week I thought it was interesting. We lost at least $150,000 in revenue by turning down a license. So, I mean, we're probably well at $2 million. What I just said here is $2 million. And so I think that's a lot of money, and I can probably find more that can be changed here. And if I go through and we start to really drill down to these departments, because I think many of these departments have issues that need to be looked into much closer. Thank you.
Good evening, Kevin O'Connor. We didn't get here overnight. Nothing happens in a vacuum. It's my belief as a general statement that senior members of the current council and previous councils put us here. A lot of people sometimes go, well, Kevin, why are you worried about the past? And I do believe that the past is prologue. And I think we got here, and until we can acknowledge that, I think we're going to have a hard time moving forward. That being said, some items, that I found, on the website, it said that 77% of our city's budget is labor. So I would once again ask, why do we have a 311 system? I would direct that to you, Wally, with 12 new union positions. And also I would ask, where was the mandate for a 311 system? I mean, I can honestly remember the debate about, gee, you got to be able to get to the calls quicker and get a response from the city, but the solution wasn't it was probably asking, in my sense, the people that worked here to be able to do their job better. And I know that there's been staff cuts. As far as capital needs, there's a picture of Chicago Avenue between Lake and Main up on this presentation. I have a street in mind, and it's the street in front of the Sienna. That was not part of a TIF district. We did not have a remediation ordinance in place. We let these developers ruin our streets, and as they waltzed off either in town or out of town with their profits, we were left as taxpayers holding the bag in that. So, these are things we didn't get here, magically. One thing that's bothersome just tonight is that there's so few people here, and there was only 87 comments or ideas online. I don't know if it should be Engage Evanston, or maybe we should use the word Enrage Evanston to inspire a little more passion. I honestly don't know the answer to that. On the issue of fleet services, there was a picture shown up here, and while you made mention of the rolling stock of fleet vehicles. And I remember that from when it was in the council before, so I looked up some figures today, and we spent in the 2011 adopted budget just under $2 million capital outlay on fleet services. In the 2010 adopted budget, it was $1.7 million. However, there was only a slight reduction in maintenance costs between 2011 and 2010, resulting in a reduction in maintenance costs of $20,046. Now, it seems to me, and maybe I need to, if we could get an idea of how many new vehicles has the city bought the last 5, 6 years, 10 years, whatever, and why aren't we getting a reduction in the maintenance end of that? I see a lot of new vehicles when I drive around, and I know that vehicle exists with the rust, but I tend to see new ones when I'm driving. For this infrastructure, $700,000 to $800,000 was spent at the closure of the downtown TIF that I was hoping and assuming would be rebated back to all the tax districts, so that would keep taxes low. But it redid the streetscape down the street where the Century Theater is. So you look at some of these other streets and you ask yourself, where did the money go? Why wasn't this taken care of? And the TIFs, you have to keep the money in the TIFs. So their streets look fine. The rest of the streets look pretty bad. And the TIFs are a big reason as to why we got in this situation, in my opinion, in that. And as far as taking $2 million out of operating funds because we can't repay the debt, I don't even know how to comment on that. When the first TIF was opened 25 years ago, promises were made that this city would not, if we got the downtown to TIF, we would not have to have an increase in taxes. What has happened now? We have less services. I've noticed street signs that say street sweeping is only once every 3 weeks. So we've gone from this, the money it went to the developers, it went into those TIF areas. The TIF districts raise their taxes, and we still give away money at the Economic Development Committee in that and in our other ways. You know, but not to all of our businesses. There are businesses in this town that never ask for anything. There's other businesses that say, I'll come, but you got to give me something, or I'll stay if you give me something. And I use this phrase often, I'll use it again. I don't think it's right to privatize profit and socialize risk. And that in our money, we have money. It's just a question of priorities. And then two more things on that. The community comparison, quite frankly, I think it's a false comparison. I don't know that we want to be comparing ourselves to Berkeley or Cambridge. What I'd most be interested in is, can we compare to a solvent community? And maybe it's a conservative community, maybe it isn't. But I mean, let it have a college, but we really need to get something that's substantial in a conservative sense fiscally, okay? I don't mind if it's socially progressive, that's fine. But our problem is we were not conservative. We were spending, and we're still spending money we don't have. We're paying more taxes for less services. On that. And then finally, I had two ideas I put on the Engage Evanston site. One was to consider reducing your salary, Wally, which is $175,000, and also reduce the salaries of the mayor and the aldermen. And it got 27, I think, positive, because I didn't see a negative sign. So who knows? You know, maybe I was onto something. But what bothered me was, and this happened last year at the second community meeting, I also put in file for bankruptcy. And at the Levy Center last year, the meeting with the alleged lost videotape, it was a struggle between you and me as to whether you were going to put it up on the board. So I would please ask, I don't know why it didn't go through, when I typed this in, but please put on file for bankruptcy. All issues should be on the table. I don't know if that's a help or a hurt. I went through everything about 2 o'clock and I didn't see it.
I went through about half an hour ago.
Okay, well, maybe it, okay, that's all right. All right, thank you.
Before the next speaker, if you have other suggestions for cities, could you let me know? Thank you.
Mike Fasolko, 2728 Reese. I just have a couple of requests maybe for future meetings, and since it'll take some time to hopefully get these people here, but some of the bigger issues are the pension, and several people have put that up on the list of issues at Engage Evanston. So the pension system in Illinois, right before the election, it was a pretty hot topic. After the election, it's kind of, you don't hear too much about it. So I'm wondering if, Wally, if somebody from the city can organize getting our state representatives or senators here at one of the budget meetings so that we can maybe talk frankly with them in the room as a group. Similarly, I'm going to move away from Alderman Burris for a moment. Just wondering if we could get somebody from Northwestern University here also to talk somewhat frankly about their financial relationship with Evanston. Maybe somebody who oversees the endowment, possibly. And lastly, from our side, who in particular, or what's the team of people that negotiates our union contracts? Somebody with a good poker player face, or an Al Pacino type, possibly, that somebody with some strength behind those negotiations. Hopefully, maybe that person or persons we could speak to publicly.
I'm responsible for all the union contracts, so I wish I had a good Al Pacino line to come back with, but I don't.
How are you all today? The gentleman before me did a very good job. They hit on a couple of good points that I wasn't aware of. Oh, of course. Okay. My name is Nicaro. I live on Dewey. But like I was saying before, the gentleman before me did a very good job in what they were saying. They informed me, a very naive citizen of Evanston, which I think is a very nice place to live. I mean, the lake is beautiful. The people are okay. Summer. The bad one downplays the good, so, you got to. But anyway, some suggestions I had about the city was really just more generation of jobs. And I feel like a way we could do that is probably going green. Not so much as going green, but solar energy and alternate energy. I know that that's a problem here in the city, appliances and things like that. So going green with solar energy and things like that could generate some jobs. It could definitely help the community out in the long run. It's very innovative. I feel as though it would be a trend. Maybe Northwestern will pick up, things like that. And my second suggestion would be public transportation. Somehow, some way, making it more affordable or making it cheaper, more like a reduced price type thing for college students, people who are working, people who have to use the bus and not too much need to use their cars, because as we can see, the prices for gas is steadily rising, and you never know, by the summer, maybe sky high. So some way to get the public transportation system more working with the community and more working with the citizens, so that when they do go to work, it's not a hassle and don't have to use a car so much, because we do know that carbon dioxide is killing the atmosphere. So those are two of my suggestions, and I thank you for listening.
Other comments?
Hi, I'm Kate Mahoney. I live at 2538 Grosse Pointe Road, and I just want to encourage the prioritization of mental health and other human services that I think are really essential to the way that we protect citizens in our community and improve the quality of life, and are a good investment. And I think the social service agencies in our town do a good job then of bringing additional dollars, but foundations and other funders like to see that the community is investing as well. So I think it's really a good investment when we do that. I want to encourage people to do more of that. Thank you. And one last comment is I had a number of people who were a little confused between this process and the Evanston 150 process. So when the postcards came out, I think some people aren't totally getting it. So we all of us who are here need to keep spreading the word. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Peggy Nelson, and thanks to the city for holding this meeting tonight. I want to give a little bit different perspective. I watched your presentation, and I really didn't see anything on the chart that showed how this process would take into account the value of something to the city's businesses, which obviously brings a value to the city as a whole. And I'm speaking specifically about the arts. I have a daughter who has spent her from age 6 to 18 in Evanston taking classes at the Noise Cultural Arts Center of one kind or another, and I myself have been able to enjoy the shows and other programs that are at that location. I'm not from Evanston, but I know there's a lot of people like me who come to Evanston to enjoy the arts, and I think the arts is something that the city wants to draw because it is so beneficial to the businesses here. I sat down to think about what I myself do, because I bring my daughter to classes at the Noise Center at least 4 times a week, if not 5. And during that time, sometimes she's there for an hour, sometimes 2, I do all my shopping. So I go to Evanston Whole Foods, I go to the restaurants, I buy my clothes. My daughter buys her clothes here. I buy all my books at the Barnes & Noble. I buy my gas at the local gas stations. I frequent virtually every store on Noyes Street and in downtown Evanston while I'm waiting for my daughter to take these classes and when I come to see the shows. It's very routine for us to go out to dinner afterwards. And this is something that a lot of parents do who have their kids go through these programs. And this is all to the benefit of the businesses in Evanston. If the Noise Cultural Arts Center is put up on a list for sale, the building is put in play. You know, there may be discussion about arts organizations or others taking it over, and the possibility that these organizations would stay or move to another Evanston location, but maybe they won't. that is put in play when you put the Noyes Cultural Arts Center on a list for sale. What I was thinking is that, you know, what might be more appropriate is for the city to work on developing a plan and have a vision for what it's doing in respect to the arts. Instead of just trying to solve a budget problem by getting rid of things, think about how we can integrate, how the city can integrate the arts into the budget plan with a plan for the arts specifically. And I guess part of why I care about this is, you know, I've realized that Evanston is the city where I want to live, and I'm planning to move here, and I don't want it to be a city that's not friendly to the arts. There are so many arts organizations in that city. But if the building is sold and it doesn't go to the arts organizations and some of the arts organizations leave, I'm not going to have the same reason to come to Evanston 4 nights a week like many other parents do and invest in the Evanston businesses. Evanston is a hub for the arts, and it's one of the things that makes it so attractive when I think about moving here. What I'd suggest, at least with respect to that building, is to slow down, because the time frame that we have here is very short. And the notion of arts organizations being able to get a building and figure out how to work with each other and with the community within the amount of time that we have here is pretty close to impossible. The arts also promote many of the goals that were in the slides, such as financial vitality, safety, and supporting the youth of the town. Thank you.
Other comments?
Mr. City Manager, could
Yes,
we
ma'am.
give this lady an award for being our best guest?
Thank you for visiting.
I'd be curious to know, we're going to do these comparisons. She comes here for the arts, and she has nothing but good things to say about the city. I'm wondering where, if we could find out, you don't have to say it out loud, but where she comes from and how our programs compare to her city's programs.
Sure, if she's prepared to tell us off camera, that'd be great.
I come from Glencoe, which is 4 towns north.
Right.
We're a town of 8,000. We have limited programs, so.
And miss, they can't hear you on television. She says she comes from Glencoe
Right,
with the
right.
tastiest water in Illinois.
Because they only use sand and chlorine, I read.
Any other comments? We'll let everyone do one pass first before we go to second passes.
Carl Bova from 1322 Rosalie Street. A couple of things are reiterations, I'm sure, of what Wally has heard earlier. But one thing, identify the city property ownership parcels, their utilizations across the board, all departments, any surpluses, and any future needs that might be envisioned. We should be gathering multiple year information on highly variable expenses, such as snow removal. Then develop a process or an algorithm to fund up to some % of the long-term trend in those costs so that we level out the peaks and troughs in those highly variable cost items. For moderately variable expenses, and those might include yard waste or tree removal and planting, that varies somewhat from year to year. We should also be gathering multiple year information and develop a similar funding mechanism or perform even a regression analysis to fund at some level with some identification that those costs can be both a controlled and acceptable, should they not be sufficient especially. You've made good strides in understanding our long-term debt. Where did it go? Oh, well. And the debt retirement planning as well. Develop a long-term strategy for reducing and controlling that debt. I heard some of those things already this evening. Similarly, the parking lot and garage fund and long-term operation and maintenance costs thereof are beginning to be understood, so we can and are funding accordingly. This may be a plan for 20 or 30 or 40 years, and the Parking and Transportation Committee is a great example of how a committee can act to understand and then plan for those and give meaningful feedback to the City Council for expenditures. We should be developing a 100-year utility plan for the water and sewer facilities in the city, and this may be the closest to realization to date. Similarly, and I brought this up some time ago to the council, that I believe that there should be a 100-year plan for roadways, alleys, lighting, street maintenance, and the like. Now, if you take all of these long-term plans and develop a strategy to deliver those services, you could do so at less cost, plan the expenditures, and extend the useful life. When you extend the useful life, it's money in the bank. The unfortunate thing, it's not overnight. And so it is a long-term commitment, and I applaud the city manager for at least making strides to increase capital expenditures to reduce the deterioration of especially our city streets and other facilities. Thank you.
Good evening, Marge Anderson from 2647 Broadway. One thing I've thought about for quite a while, and I have never brought it up, Wally, is I'm wondering if the city's ever gone out and tried to bring in a Costco or a Walmart. I know it's quite a distance. We don't have anything on the North Shore like that at all. And a lot of my relatives in the western suburbs patronize them for staples. I think we probably, with the facilities over at Dempster and Dodge, if that facilities would sell, I would hope we'd attract, would be wonderful sales revenue, I believe. And then secondly, when we have the restaurants and businesses wanting to use the sidewalk, it's encroaching on the public's use of the sidewalk. I'd like to see us expand the clear space for the residents. I think it's 6 feet from the curb. I'd like that to go to 10 feet. It's very difficult to walk with a family and a stroller and walk with a friend, but you've got to get around the parking meters, and it's my sidewalk. I pay for it. I maintain it. It's part of the city property. And if we're going to charge a fee, which I believe we do, I think it should be comparable to what they're paying for at retail. I think what we charge them is so minuscule, it's ridiculous. We should be charging $10 a square foot to use my sidewalk. And let's bring us the revenue in exchange for using my public space. Thank you.
Ron Fleckman. I guess I have a different thought. One is that oftentimes over the years, the city talks about wanting to be sort of a leadership city, which I think is a wonderful goal. When we talk about comparing the city to other cities, there's lists. I think Forbes and Kiplinger have these lists of the most desirable cities in the country. Could we look at cities that are comparable in size, comparable in what's it called? Well, the demographics for sure, but I think more in income, average income per capita kinds of stuff, and very high citizen satisfaction with the city. Because it seems like in city hearings we hear an awful lot of the negative stuff. We don't really hear a whole lot of public satisfaction. And I think the city's a great city. And it would be interesting if we compared our city to the ideal city, if there is an ideal city somewhere in the country that's, somebody either disagrees or
Getting
agrees.
the attention.
Yeah. So my thinking is we should, obviously we're in a financially difficult time, and I think most cities around the country are, but we should be looking at what's the ideal and making decisions off of that. But the ideal should be what's the target. And I think the ideal should have to do with citizen public satisfaction, people that are happy with their city, so.
Thank you. Jeff Smith. I was at the meeting that Kevin referred to with the lost videotape, and since it's lost, I can say some of the same things that I said last fall, I guess, without fear of repeating myself. But I'll start with one thing that the city has done right, I think, and it's a hard but necessary thing, even in tough times, is that we have to continue to invest in the future. That means making Evanston more of a destination, doing the things that will rebound in future revenue for the city, attracting people from other areas to come here. Arts are one of our strengths, and the performing arts in particular need more stimulus or at least encouragement in some form or another. The loss of Bill's Blues leaves a real void in the town, and we, I think, would benefit by having an actual plan to not just wait and see what people want to come and bring to, say, the Fountain Square space, but try and let it be known that we have space available, the demographics of a potential audience or a potential market for businesses, actively seek those out, utilizing volunteer energy if possible, and so that we can minimize staff time spent on such a project and really try and brand ourselves that way. Evanston has to really develop its brand, and the things we can build on are obvious: intellectual capital, human energy, our progressive values, and our aspiration to be one of the greenest cities in Illinois, if not in the country. The Economic Development Fund is a proper use for that. The question is how much amount, but I think it's more important to spend money on these larger programmatic ideas and efforts than on perhaps something like a facade improvement. With regard to personnel, the city has cut headcount. I always have mixed feelings about that. If we were inefficient before that happened, then it's laudable. But if we weren't, and even if we were a little bit, I always feel bad about any individual, let alone groups of individuals, losing their jobs. It seems to me that layoffs distribute the pain rather unequally. And last fall, at this meeting that we didn't tape, I asked, what about the overall personnel costs, overall compensation package, including pensions, and also including the capitalized value of pensions? Thank you, Alderman Burris. It's bad enough to be droning without squeaking. The Evanston Now website recently published, I guess they finally obtained some overall figures on compensation that, at least on an individual by individual basis, which I'm not as interested in, saying this person makes too much or not, is looking at the overall levels. And it's hard to tell, as a previous speaker mentioned, because where the FTE and where the part-time cutoff is. That would be useful for certainly citizens to know in trying to evaluate overall compensation package levels. But I just took the top 735 employees and made a cutoff there because I doubt that we pay a full-time employee less than $24,000. And the average, this is a mean, not a median, compensation came to a salary of just under $69,000. Now, if benefits are running us 33 cents for every dollar in salary, which your pie chart, Mr. Bobkovich, seemed to indicate, that takes it up to a little over $91,000 per employee, and that doesn't include the future value of pensions, because we already know, because we have shortfalls and deficits, that we're not presently funding the value of pensions out of present dollars. So you have to build in some number X to figure out what the real value is, and if somebody is going to be drawing at their last 4 years of salary at somewhere between 50 and 75%, depending on the union contract they have for 20 to 30 years, it starts to be a considerable amount. In litigation, If you were doing a divorce or if you're doing any type of valuation, you would back that out and assign a present value to it. And I think if we did that, we would see that the average compensation package in the city of Evanston currently is over $100,000. Now, I'm not saying that people don't deserve that. I don't think we should. In my ideal world, we all make $100,000 or better, every year in, year out. And I know people work hard, but the question is, what can we afford in public service? About 10 years ago, when we were in another economic downturn, I was a partner at a law firm, and our revenues were flat, and our health care costs went up. Well, we had no choice but to actually lower our take-home compensation. But I think all of us would rather have done that than to kick one of our partners or employees out completely and let them bear all the burden. So, if an average compensation package is $100,000, even if it's $90,000, that's above poverty level. So, a slight tightening of the belt, as painful as it might be, because we all tend to spend up to whatever we've made the last year, seems to me that it's not going to throw anybody out on the streets. And until we right our ship, that may be one thing that we have to do, and that may be the stance that we have to take in union negotiations. As much as I would like to see everybody get a raise year in, year out, and be able to have their income grow with longevity, put their kids through college, et cetera, et cetera. The city constantly complains about the state requiring generous pension benefits for police and fire, but the city has complete control over salary. I'm not going to go into the argument again about having to cut services, except to say that I still don't believe that we know that we don't just buy services. We buy stuff like beach house facilities that cost over $1 million, surveillance cameras to spy on ourselves, speed bumps that annoy as many people as they protect, and I think we have at least as many signs and signals on our streets as we do trees. You can barely see the trees for the signs on some streets. And I agree with you, Mr. City Manager, that perhaps the distinction between operating and expenses and capital spending is somewhat of an artifice, but I would argue that the flow ought to go the other way, that we ought to be looking for things that actually are annual expenses year in, year out, and rather than capitalize them and take from general revenue into these big ticket items, we look where we can flow the other way. I don't assume that the city has already squeezed every cent of inefficiency, discretion, and overpayment from its operating budget. I don't think most citizens believe that. I know that there's not a lot of luxury around this building, that's for sure. Yet we see some stop-and-start projects, things that are a mystery to many, like the stairs of this building that contractors I talk to say, well, I could have put those stairs in a couple days, and it goes on months and months, and now there seems to be some other aspects to it. So we really have to ask what value we get for our service dollars. That said, I'm going to conclude with a couple positive things. People are suggesting online that we improve the fleet efficiency. I know that the city has taken real steps to try and both improve the mix of ecological benefit as well as efficiency that it's getting out of its vehicles, and you need to broadcast that more. The second thing is that a year ago I urged that we leverage the intellectual capital and the energy of the volunteers in the city, and there have been efforts towards that. The wind farm committee is largely being done with volunteer energy, and other than keeping the lights on and the sustainability coordinator doing what I would consider part of her core job by showing up to the meetings, the energy of the volunteers and their efforts is not costing the city money. And the more things that we can do like that, and I know that Evanston is willing to pitch in, the more we'll be able to weather these hard times and come out of it on top. Thank you.
Comments? Sure, one last one.
Hi, John Smesko again. One of the larger elements of the budget is public safety, and we have the police and fire. And I know that in the past we've talked about, possibilities of eliminating a fire station or reducing staffing, whatever. And I have a very hard time trying to put those into context because in general, people have a hard time understanding low probability events, and fires don't happen very often. I don't normally expect to have to be taken in an ambulance either. And I'm hoping that there could be some better way of communicating to the public at large incident rates or some sort of connection between staffing and I believe the reduced crime that we've seen over the last few years, so that we can perhaps make a better, more informed decision about those types of things that are a very large part of the budget.
Any other final comments? Again, I hope that this has been useful. Again, we'll be going, collecting ideas from residents through Saturday. We'll be online. We'll be at the farmers market on Saturday. Joellen, where are we tomorrow? We're at the Robert Crown Center tomorrow evening, which is Friday, and then we'll be at the farmers market on Saturday. You can send us emails at info@cityofevanston.org, letters at 2100 Ridge Avenue, Evanston, Illinois 60201. Call us on 311, or again, we'll be online. We'll be at the council at a special meeting in 10 days on the 16th of May, and then we'll get the council's latest direction on all of this, and then we'll work through the remainder of the spring into the summer, and we'll be back with additional workshops in September. So thank you. Alderman Rainey, any comments from members of the council who are here?
I have a question about how we respond to people who raised issues. For example, the woman who talked about economic development and the arts. Why don't we do something? I mean, we all know that we have a very active economic development and the arts effort underway at the moment. In terms of other economic development issues, Marge mentioned, why don't we talk to somebody like Walmart? Well, we know we've been talking to Walmart. We've been talking to Walmart for about 2 months. To the extent even of talking to the senior vice president personally, saying, come where you're wanted, as opposed to where you're not wanted. So there's so much we do, and we do well, but we don't share the information. Just like John just talked about what we do with police and fire. How do we get that information out? I find that my neighbors south in Rogers Park are very full of Evanston envy. Now, maybe somebody like Kevin O'Connor would say, well, that's because they don't live here. They don't hate it. You know, if they lived here, they'd hate it. So, I mean, I just find that this city is, yes, we have our money problems, but we are just beating our brains out and working as hard as any city could possibly work to do some of the things that our residents are telling us we should be doing. So if we could just get the word out that we are working hard, and I think to a great extent working smart.
Well, if you don't mind, since she mentioned,
And I have no problem with privatizing profit. That's where the profit should be privatized.
Yeah. I would only say this, Alderman Rainey, since you
Yes, sir.
personally said my name, Kevin O'Connor. I have family that live in Rogers Park. I used to live in Rogers Park. And you've made this before. You made it at the TIF meeting. I made a comment and went around the room, and then you said, for all of us that love Evanston, as if I didn't. And what's interesting to me, Alderman Rainey, you've had a long aldermanic tenure, and you really have seen where we've gone, which has really been difficult in a fiscal sense. So I would ask you the question, why isn't your message getting out, and how did we get here? And would you please, and I would ask this of all the senior members, take ownership for the problems that we face instead of running from them. One of the things that's very important is an honest partnership. And as far as volunteers, we have a lot of volunteers that were with the branches, and they received very, very poor treatment by this council. So be careful what you ask for, and you remember all of that battle. Thank you.
Alderman Burris.
Actually, I want to thank you. I think this was a good start tonight and through this program of explaining more about the budget, our process, and explaining where the money's going. Last budget season, I know, and the season before, we got a lot of comments about from people where you don't want to spend, where you don't want to cut, where we should put money. But as I was walking in this evening, talking to someone from the League of Women Voters, who are outstanding, and thank you for always coming, said we need to get that message out as well, over and over again, of this is where the money is going. It's not, we've said it a lot of times, it's not like we have just surplus of money. We have cut a lot in the last 2 years. It's been painful for all of us that sit up here. It's been painful for the community for what we've cut. And we just need to tell people this is not an easy process for any of us, and once again, where we're spending our dollars. So thank you for doing this, and I hope this continues on. Thanks.
Great. Again, thank you all for coming out, and we'll talk soon. Good night.